Okay, well, I've sent you out a lot of references for you to kind of save your time looking things up. So let's go to the question of whose responsibility. Ernie was originally wanting to argue for the gods behind all of this. I don't know if he still has after review, but let's get started with somebody else. How about you, Bill? Would you want to get us started on this?
Sure. I've been thinking about it ever since you first posed the question. And the more I think about it, and the more I reread the quotes you've given us, I find myself thinking, this reminds me a lot of the present day. When people go to war today, and they kill someone, when they're sitting around in a pub drinking beer afterwards, they may boast about the fact, I killed that person. But at the same time, when they go into combat, they may pray to God saying, please, God, help, kill the enemy for me. Make sure that everybody plays this sort of strange game with the gods or God, sometimes invoking him or her, and sometimes claiming credit themselves. I'm not sure it's that different from today's world.
So, meaning what?
Meaning that that depending on your point of view, if you're a fundamentalist, then God did it all, and if you're more of a rationalist or an atheist or an agnostic, you may claim credit for yourself, and probably most people are somewhere in between. In ancient Greece and today, I think.
And how can someone be in between?
Well, because we're human. It's sort of our nature. There are times that I have absolutely no belief in God, and then there are times when the car is careening across the road and I'm about to go into the ditch, where I believe in God big time.
How often does that happen, Bill, in an average day?
Oh, fortunately, not too often.
I don't think Aeschylus himself, the playwright, comes down firmly on one side or the other, and I don't think he has his characters do that either. We seem to see, obviously, the gods are meddling in human life, but in a way that suggests that they have an influence, or they want to have an influence, but they don't have that but they're not omnipotent. For one thing, they don't all speak with one voice anyway. They're at each other all the time, and so what one god wants, another god opposes. That kind of cosmology doesn't really lend itself to any sort of all-powerful supernatural being. And I think when we see Apollo and Orestes interacting, it's clear that Apollo has a lot of influence, but he doesn't command, he doesn't coerce. In the end, Orestes has to make his own decision. He is persuaded by Apollo, and you could argue, I suppose, that because Apollo seems to claim the power, at least, to make his life miserable if he doesn't go along, that's more than simply influence. But I think in the end, it's free will that he's exercising. So I'm in the middle on it. As depicted here, I don't think you could come down firmly on one side or the other and say Aeschylus believes in either free will or in manipulation by the gods.
I think, the free will argument runs through basically every religion that I've ever looked at or studied. But I think that Aeschylus, I'm looking at Scene 3 and Women at the Graveside. line 300, where Orestes, I think, says, "Should I believe at all in oracles like these? Well, even if I did not, still it must be done, the deed. For there are many urgings which combine to this one end beside the God's command. There is the heavy burden of my grief and pressure from my lack of wealth. And I should not allow the glorious citizens of Argos, valiant conquerors of Troy, to live on as they are, subject to a brace of women." So, I mean, I could hear that in Arizona today, probably, but so I think Orestes saying, it doesn't really matter what the gods say, because I was going to do this deed anyway, and he did.
Yeah, I think, well, it's certainly the free will issue, goes back to every religion in the world. I was never raised a Calvinist, but I always thought that they had an interesting point of view that God, you had to do what God believed you were going to do, but you had to pretend you had a free will anyway. And you had to pretend you could act good and avoid and go to heaven, even though, your fate was sealed. But I would say this, in these plays, it's all over the map. I mean, the main characters admit that they admit, yes, I killed my husband. Yes, I killed my mother. I mean, they're just flat out admitting it. And, in the trial, there's no debate about it. But then you get these comments especially by the chorus, that, well, everything is ordained by Zeus. And so you have the same tension that you have in religions today.
Well, I think we know modern psychology has taught us enough to question the concept of free will anyway. That is, we're all driven by all kinds of both rational and irrational motives, some of which we recognize, some of which we don't. I mean, almost every choice we make could probably be traced back to some sort of influences operating on us at some level. In the end, it's our choice, but we're still being manipulated, as it were, by our own complex psychology.
I was interested in one of the critiques on page 174 from a Zetland. She or he, I guess it's a she, talks about how it's fated, yet there is free will. So everything came together to so that the plan of Zeus would unfold, but yet all of the players had the individual choice about whether to commit the action or not commit the action. And it almost seemed like the gods were taking advantage or using the passions of the people involved to bring about the end that they wanted. So they brought about, or they took advantage or played upon or utilized Clytemnestra's fury at the death of her daughter, and jealousy, I guess, also over Cassandra. They used Orestes' fury at the death of his father, but by bringing those all together and putting it in the mix, the overall will of the gods was carried out.
Well put.
Yeah.
You have to remember, the gods are anthropomorphic. That is, they could be fooled. They fell in love. They could be jealous, and so on and so forth. And the matter of free will, of course, it's always up to question, because are we deceiving ourselves how much free will we actually have? When you stop and think, it's the chance coming together of our chromosomes that make us who we are. How much do they determine our choices? How much does ete or fate have to do with our everyday lives? We mistake the amount of choices we actually have. Some of these things are determined in a naturalistic way, perhaps. But yeah, I enjoyed hearing all these comments. I never thought about some of these things before.
Clytemnestra is especially clear, isn't she, when she stands outside and defends herself against the chorus and says, I did this, I'm the one who did this.
Yes, she
Right.
is.
She isn't,
Yeah.
doesn't sense herself being driven by anybody, even by her furies. That is, they're operating in a way, but she did it.
Yeah.
Right.
She's taking responsibility for her actions,
That's right.
whereas others maybe haven't.
Something
Another,
nobody else does. Yeah.
Or taking credit. You could say.
yeah.
Taking credit, yeah.
Or is she pleasing the gods?
Yeah.
Out of it.
Well, yeah, I don't.
He is done.
Seems in you know, when you set up this sheet, responsibility for the killing of in the case of Agamemnon, Clytemnestra, I couldn't really find anything to limit, or there are no caveats there. I did it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what? You know, he deserved it. My daughter is avenged.
How is it that you find most of the analyses bringing in the gods, especially Zeus, the top god, who seems to be the one, in spite of what Richard and Ernie have pointed out, that the gods do disagree with each other, but they seem to then, in the end, refer to Zeus as the ultimate decider of things. But how is it that we only get that defense, or we get it mostly, I should say, from the chorus?
I read that personally as once again typical of the way popular culture deals with religion, and that the chorus represents the popular concept of Athenian society. You know, we hear the same thing in the world today. You know, with evangelical Christians saying that God's behind everything. It just that's the way I read the chorus, that they represent the common view of things.
You know, but I was surprised that Zeus himself was not exactly a paragon of virtue. I think he got his wife to turn into a fly and ate her, and then had a birth out of his head. And you know, it's you know,
I hate it
not
when that happens.
exactly
I think
not exactly a wonderful guy.
He murdered his brother, didn't he?
I think he's a father of 39 other persons or goddesses.
Sounds like he could be the Republican nominee for president.
But you've got to remember, you know, in the Old Testament, Jehovah tells the Israelites to smash the babies of the Canaanites against the walls. You know, the Judeo-Christian God has also had his bad moments.
And in the Jewish religion, one of the great stories is Abraham taking his son Isaac to be
Exactly.
sacrificed,
Yeah.
because God
Right.
commanded him to do that.
Yeah, the Old Testament God was jealous. I mean, you know, here he was going to wipe out all of humanity, and he had to be argued out of only wiping out 2 cities. Or if I recall, maybe even Noah argued with him about the flood.
Sure.
He
was like, I'm just going to kill everybody.
Start all over again.
Humans that said, no, wait a minute, not everybody.
If the chorus represents the people, after all, they are called in the first 2 at least. They are the elders. In the third, it's not clear whether the chorus itself turns into the Furies, but at least at the beginning there, if they are the Athenian elders and represent society in general, as Bill suggests, how strong does that voice then speak in this? trilogy?
Well, people keeping in mind that the tragic flaw of hubris, prideful infatuation of yourself, to believe yourself as better than the gods, the main characters largely ignore the advice of the chorus, sometimes becoming directly antagonistic to the chorus in almost all the Greek plays. And Creon actually in Antigone threatens the chorus. So you can see the kind of disdain they have because of their hubris, because of their pride, in my opinion.
Well, also the chorus is sort of comic off and on throughout the plays. So it doesn't seem as if Aeschylus is taking their point of view too seriously all the time. Vox populi.
Right.
Annabelle?
Yeah, it seems sometimes the chorus, what's the word, validates what the speaker is saying, but sometimes the chorus provides a counterpoint or to what the speaker is saying. So I guess I haven't really looked at it to see when they do which, but I felt like they provided that dual function, sometimes validating, sometimes sort of cross-examining or taking issue with what the person they're in conversation with says.
Can you point to any place there? Or
Well, the libation bearers, that chorus there, the women there were very, seemed to be very supportive of Orestes and Electra. But then when Clytemnestra would appear, they were antagonistic toward her. Also, they provided the cross-examination as the Furies at the trial of Orestes.
Yeah.
But of course, even the chorus doesn't always speak with one voice. There's that the scene where they take different points of view after the death of Agamemnon. What do we do now? Now that's not perhaps important in the large scheme of things, except it does somewhat respond to your question about whether the chorus. It's a response in the sense that the chorus may not be intended to be one thing only, but even if it is, it's only another voice. It's only another point of view that adds to what I see as the overall ambivalence here about responsibility.
Right.
But I think it is important that the only person who is ready to step up and take responsibility is Clytemnestra, because she has to be, this gets a little bit into the second question that you asked, she has to be a strong character because there's a huge change going on here, represented by the acquittal of Orestes. Up until then, she had every reason, I think, to believe that her crime, so-called, would not be considered any worse than any other murder, and yet it is. In the end, Athena pronounces her to be more guilty than Orestes. I don't think that would have the resonance that it does, and the significance that it has thereafter. For gender equality, as it were, if Clytemnestra were not such a powerful voice. Basically, the male society has managed to silence the strongest possible female.
He really steals the show.
She does. She has to. She has to, I think, I don't know what point of view Aeschylus wants us to take from this, but it does seem to me that he is saying something significant about a changing of the guard, as it were, in Greek culture, in human culture.
You know, when I talked to Melissa, my wife, about these plays, she read them years ago. She pointed out that, and I think we have a philosopher in our midst, so he may be able to straighten me out on this, but she said that Aristotle makes a claim that that women who behave like men are by definition bad women. And that's the way she read Clytemnestra, is that Aeschylus is showing us by her very dominance and power that she clearly is wicked, at least by the standards of 458 BC Greece. Is that, I have no idea whether or not that's true. Do you know anything about it, Forrest? Is that?
No, no, I don't actually. Don't remember that. Do you, Mike?
No, I don't remember. No. I mean, I remember reading Aristotle, but I don't remember him making a comment about women anywhere in particular.
Well, he does say, and I think one of the commentators refers to this, or maybe in the footnotes, but Aristotle does further the common notion that in childbirth, women are merely the carriers of the child, and none of their genes, as it were. I mean, they didn't know about genes. None of the part of her is placed in the newborn, and so the newborn is only. In fact, that does appear as an argument, doesn't it, along the trilogy? I forget just where, but anyway, that the child, it's a weak argument. It's acknowledged that children are the offspring of their father.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Sounds like the Dobbs decision.
Yeah. I don't know how they would maintain this when there would be children who looked very much like their mother.
Well, Aristotle,
But they did.
Aristotle's science at the time was that the man's semen contained little people, and the little people were planted inside of the woman, and the woman just basically was the carrier of it. So the women did not genetically have anything to do with the creatures that they born.
Didn't contribute anything.
Yeah, they did. Well, right. They didn't contribute anything.
That's part of why Orestes got off, because why he was found innocent, because that was the argument that Apollo made. And Athena agreed with Apollo. So she said, you know, if it ends up to be a tie, I'll cast my lot with Orestes, because the father is more important than the mother.
Right.
But yet, then at the end, when the Furies were furious, she knew that she had to placate them. She had to do something to make sure that they would not bring death and destruction upon Athens as a result of losing and being invalidated by the verdict.
And so how are they placated?
Well, she was
she
was saying that she'd give them a throne. I forget what all of the everything was, but she went back 3 or 4 times trying to bargain with them. Well, I'm going to give you this and this, and you're going to be honored in the land, and people are going to name their children after you. Oh, if that's not good enough, I'm going to give you this. I'm going to give you this, and then finally at the end they bought off on it.
Yeah.
They go from being supernatural stalkers to being good fairies, as it were. They just
Sure do, yeah.
And she does it through persuasion.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, she does it through persuasion,
Can
not
you hear me?
logical arguments.
Yeah, persuasion. I
Okay.
guess. It's the same kind of persuasion that that Apollo used on Athena when he pointed out that if she acquits Orestes, then Orestes will be in her debt and will be her ally, her military ally, as it were, in the protection of Athens forevermore, which is a kind of victory for what you might call male value. The power of the sword wins out over any other values, or at least takes part in the vanquishing of any other concept of justice. And Athena, you could say, just sells out her gender.
Well, I felt like she was open. She would have been open to what the verdict was. So if it was clearly a guilty verdict, she would have gone along with that. But because she stated, I will accept the decision of the jury, but if it's tied, I'm throwing my lot in with Orestes because of this principle of the father being,
which
primary.
It's too bad.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My connection's pretty bad. Remember, perhaps the most important part of all that scene is that she transforms the Furies, who are symbols of retributive justice, into the Eumenes, and they come out on the stage holding hands as a sign of that justice will now be the arbitrator in these cases, and not retributive justice, not an eye for an eye. As you mentioned, same thing happens with the ancient Hebrew society, the Old Testament, the story of retributive justice. So
yeah, but I do think that is somewhat undercut by the deal that's been struck here, which clearly has overtones of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, and what I can offer you is the power of the sword, which you will need in order to defend these Athenian virtues that you think so highly of.
It's almost like it's a society in transition. So the old way, still is predominant, but there is this slow transition that we don't see in the play, but perhaps comes later to something that is more just and more fair.
We see it at the end, don't we?
Yeah. Well, yes. Yeah.
And also,
Ernie just mentioned that. Yes.
And I think Aeschylus is also sort of playing to the audience a little bit. He's telling his Athenian audience that the kingdom, Orestes' kingdom, will be our ally forever and ever, and they better be, because they owe us. They owe Athena, and he's also telling the Athenian audience, God, this is a beautiful place here at Athens, and the Eumenides are going to make it that way forever and ever, eternally. Everybody goes home happy.
Except perhaps.
Go ahead, Richard.
I was just going to say, except perhaps the jurors, who of course are totally silent. We know nothing about them, how many there are. I guess we can assume they were male, but obviously a couple of them voted for Clytemnestra, or it wouldn't have been a tie.
Half of them do, yeah.
Yeah, did, whatever the number it was. So, and they already, I think they already, no, they didn't know what Athena had done at that point. They weren't influenced by her, but, and of course she didn't know what they had done either. But I wish we had a little, something more on those jurors, because they do represent the old order, which is now being whose doom is now being sealed. I mean, Clytemnestra is the heavy.
I think we do know how many there are. There were 6 chorus members who vote, each with, a 2-line speech. So I'm assuming there were only 6 jurors here.
No, 12.
12.
12.
12.
12, and there are 6 on each side.
Does she say 12? I don't know, but I don't think, I didn't get that.
That's 12.
No, well,
It
when they're voting, we have chorus
It's
member
12.
1.
Well,
Course.
my point was just that it's not an open and shut case.
Right.
It's still contested. Clytemnestra still has her supporters, but Athena is not one of them. Definitely not one of them, and that makes all the difference.
I'd like to go back to Bill's earlier point about Clytemnestra, arguing that Clytemnestra is not necessarily to be held up as an ideal because she is vicious, and it's just extraordinary the kind of meanness that the other side of her being strong and intelligent and being able to lay out this plan to light the fires to bring him home, and then to devise a way to put a net over him so he can't fight back when she gives him the swords, and she gives him 1, 2, and then a third for good measure. And Bill is suggesting that she's not such an admirable figure.
Is she any worse than any of the men?
Yeah,
Trojan horse,
I don't.
raising Troy.
I
thought it interesting when I was researching this that someone pointed out that perhaps Clytemnestra was the first femme fatale in history. Genre, which I guess was popular in the 30s and 40s, the femme fatale, a seductress who was really evil to the core. And
I hope I hope I didn't explain my wife's actually point of view incorrectly. It's not so much that she's wicked as that, from Aristotle's point of view, as I understand it, she's manly, and that's her fault. Is this particular? I'm not saying I agree with this. It's my wife's fault.
You're just the messenger, right?
Yeah, I'm just the chorus here. Okay?
Oh, that's good. You're just a messenger. That's good.
Yeah. But I think that if I understand what she was saying correctly, that is what makes the Athenian audience look at Clytemnestra and say, "Oh, she's the baddie here because she's manly rather than womanly."
there are those, though, who would attribute the fact that she held a grudge for 10 years as perhaps a womanly trait. I wouldn't, of course.
Yeah, careful there.
Who might.
The relentless pursuit of justice.
Oh, good for you. There you go. That's what it was. Well, who wouldn't? I mean, when
Yeah.
I mentioned in an email, if you ever get a chance, the Greek film Iphigenia, you watch it, and it really is horrible what Agamemnon does.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So and there's a great speech Clytemnestra gives about having borne this woman out of her loins, and her labor pains, and raising her up, and then to see her slaughtered like that. Good heavens!
Yeah.
I'd kill the guy too.
And the deceit with which she got Iphigenia into his hands.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. Wedding. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll marry her off well. And so, so
Yeah,
Master says, okay, under those circumstances. But
you can say all those things about Clytemnestra and her viciousness, but she's no more vicious than any of the other murderers, than either her husband or her son. We hear a little more about how she goes about it. Perhaps it's described in more grisly terms, but and then described all over again.
But she was not only a murderer, she was also an adulteress, where her husband is out to war, fighting those deadly Trojans, and there she is fooling around.
Bringing back his war bride with him right into her house.
And you have to remember,
He
she's
brings
not
back-
the only one, Agamemnon. Remember Briseis. Achilles,
Fooled around
Achilles'
too.
slave. Remember Briseis. So Cassandra was not the only one.
yeah.
Right.
And the audience knows that, of course, the story of the Trojan War, the Odyssey and the Iliad. the Iliad especially. I would like to come back just one more time to the Furies, about how they get placated and what becomes their role. What kind of, they seem to have a role still in Athenian society, but what is that role that they have?
Arbitrators of justice, of as a rejection of the retributive way of life, retributive justice way of life. In other words, arbitrators of disputes.
But they still seem to be, they're called now the Eumenides instead
right.
of the
Right, it's the Furies. Yeah.
So they're given a different name, but then so there's still something of them in this new role. But what is that something that has a place as against the decisions of the juries, who are supposed to reason things out? And in reasoning things out, they are supposed to take into consideration, apparently, the Eumenides' point of view. But what is that?
I don't know.
Oh, either.
Can't remember.
That's a tough one, isn't it? I mean, I'm not saying that I have the answer to that.
Well, come on, Forrest. You're our teacher.
Well, I watched
I'm not that sort of teacher.
Okay.
I watched the video that Lance sent us, which, thank you, that was really helpful.
More and more.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Really helpful to see that. But at the end, they had the audience stand up as these, I forget what they called them, these wise beings or something like that, as they went off the stage. So you had a sense that, I don't know what the role was going to be exactly, but that there was something positive, that, some positive role that they would take, and that they were honored, and that the whole audience was asked to stand for them as they departed.
Forrest, may I ask the question that I asked the first session that you said we might get to?
Of course.
And that question was, did Aeschylus believe in these gods as gods? And did the people of Greece at that point of time actually embrace them as gods? Because in the fifth grade, it was mythology. It's Greek mythology. It's not Greek religion. It's Greek mythology.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think I could answer that, the second question, in a way. Certainly the gods and the stories about the gods are depicted in the temples of the time. So they're up on the top, at the front and on the sides and so on, are depicted the various struggles that the gods had and so on. So there's that goes on. And then there was annually a trip to Eleusis, to be in the temple, honoring some gods in a way that was very secret. It was so secret that we still don't know what that was all about. You can go to Eleusis, and they still have the remains of a very large area, and they think that there were maybe orgies that took place. There were certainly feasts of some sort, and it all had a religious meaning of some sort. And they walked from Athens on the Sacred Way all the way there, which you can do today if you don't want to take the bus. But there was some strong belief there, and in the trial of Socrates, one of the claims against him, which he denied, was that he didn't believe in the gods, or he believed in gods other than the normal gods, and that seemed to be part of what swayed the audience in a very close vote. There were only 16, the margin was 16 votes, as I recall, but they voted for him to be executed and drink the hemlock. So there was a very strong component of religion in that Greek society of the 5th century.
And, you know, I think it's sort of condescending of us. We've all asked these questions before. You know, did the Romans believe in Jupiter? And did the Greeks believe in Zeus and all that? And I think Forrest is absolutely right. I mean, they built all these huge temples. They expended a lot of effort on something that they supposedly didn't really take seriously. Aeschylus wrote plays about them. So did Euripides and Sophocles and everybody else. I think they were serious about their. I mean, you know, if in some future time they were to come back and look at our religion and say, you know, they took a pic of these images of a man being tortured to death and put him up at the head of their temples and called him God. You know, they might think that, well, this was all just a mythology too. You know, I think that they took it very seriously.
I mean, isn't it remarkably pejorative to think that we keep characterizing it as mythology if in fact that was the religion?
Yeah.
That mythology does not necessarily, the word myth doesn't necessarily imply that it's not true. And I think it's, up to even in the New Testament, it's clear that the pagans out there are still practicing this worship of the Greek and Roman gods. So I think there's no question that it was their religion. But the use of the word myth is something else here, that a myth, we can even talk about the myth of Noah and the myths of Abraham and all that. Doesn't mean they weren't true. They're just, it's the way the stories have come down to us. So just saying, well, it was a myth doesn't dismiss it as untrue. Today, we look at Greek and Roman mythology as, okay, nice stories, but no validity.
I was just going to point out, you know, you got to, I always remember that Aeschylus was much older than the other, as a progression of Greek playwrights. Aeschylus was born only like 10 years after Thespis, before he put on the Tragos. So the next in succession in age would be Sophocles, and you see a kind of a continuation, but also an evolution of their respect for the gods. And then by the time you get to Euripides, you know, you have that ending where Medea is rescued by the chariot of Helios, and she doesn't work out her own end, which is entirely against this whole, supposedly. I have a different opinion about. I think Aeschylus did it purposely. I mean, Euripides. Then Aristophanes, the youngest, as we go down the line in age. By the time we get to Aristophanes and the birds and the clouds, I mean, he jokes about the power of the gods. He has a toll station. Hermes can't get through to deliver messages to the earth unless he pays a toll. And they move clouds over and so on and so forth to take over the universe. So there is a progression that begins, I think, with Aeschylus, continues somewhat. Antigone really is a continuation in many ways of Clytemnestra. Creon says when Ismene is standing there in Clytemnestra, he says, "You women, what are you trying to do?" Like, as Bill pointed out, are you trying to act like men? You know, that's right from that script. And then it continues more with Euripides with the controversial ending.
Okay, let me interrupt you, Ernie.
Yeah.
I think that we can take what Ernie says is that this continues to be an issue to be dealt with by the subsequent playwrights that he is talking about. And so it's not just an issue that appears in Aeschylus, but I'd like to go back to Lance's first question then. You remember his first question? Where does Aeschylus stand? Wasn't that your question, Lance?
Yeah, absolutely was.
Where does Aeschylus stand on this issue?
Well, if nothing else, I think Aeschylus believes that religion the whole cosmology or whatever is an important means of social control. I mean, isn't that really what religion has always been? A means of influencing behavior, human behavior, either by example or by threat or whatever else. And in Greek and Roman times, the gods played the same role that more contemporary religious, more contemporary theology does. It's a way of defining human morality, the right and the wrong. And so I don't know if Aeschylus, how would we know whether he was a believer or an atheist? But whether you believe in God or not, you have to recognize the power, the social power of God or gods in the history of human affairs.
Lance, is what Richard said helpful to you?
It is helpful, but to the extent that, such a brilliant man as Aeschylus must have been to be able to write something that he did, to embrace as gods these gods that were as flawed as these gods were, it's difficult for me to get my head around that.
I think Richard's right in so many ways. Because Aeschylus, I think, represented the current thought very, very much so in Athens at that time. And as evidence of that, you can always point to the many prizes he won. He won lots and lots of prizes for his affirmation of his reverence for the gods, and not so many for people like Euripides. So I think you hit upon something. I think you're right, Richard. I think he had reverence.
I think Aeschylus was an artist, and like most artists, he reflected his society, and so we can't know for sure what he thought, but my guess was that he was ambivalent. That he probably had times just like the rest of us where his car is careening across the road and he went, "Oh God, oh Zeus, please help me," and or his chariot. And there were times when he thought it was all a nonsense. But he knew he reflected his society, and he wrote about his society, and it was important in his society, and so that's what he wrote.
Yeah, I think he was.
Aren't artists committed to? Some artists committed to challenging their society?
Sure, but I don't see that here. There are times when he makes the gods look pretty silly, but then there are times when the gods, Athena is basically creating, in a sense, creating jurisprudence in a democratic society at the end of the play. She saves the day. She turns off the curse. So. It's six of one, half a dozen of the other.
He does have a scene, I can't remember which play it is, where the chorus accuses Zeus of being inconsistent because Zeus did something to his father.
Yeah, you're right.
So
something like that. Yeah.
In the play, he does have characters actually question the gods, not just following everything they say. But I'd agree, he has so many characters in the play, and they do at various times seem to express different points of view. So I think he probably himself was ambivalent. I mean, it's hard, because you look at what is the artist compared to what is the artist's product. Faulkner wrote some pretty dark stuff. Does that mean he was a dark human being? But I think these plays reflect ambivalence, and I think it's the artist's ambivalence about the gods and society, and I think he struggles with it, and he reflects it beautifully in these plays.
Kathy, you were itching to say something. No, okay. Okay.
I-
It kind of leads into that other question that I asked at the end. So Athena helps the society to come to terms with this history of vengeance. And so from now on, things are going to be decided in a kind of peaceful way with the tradition of a jury trial for homicide, at least that issue. And then I asked whether you thought that you might think that Aeschylus's ending is over optimistic, given all the things that he has his characters and chorus especially say about human nature.
Well,
I think so. It's happily ever after.
you know, democracy wins, I guess you can say. But then the next question is, but what are the values? What are the values that are really being represented by democracy here? And if you're, as most modern readers would be, turned off by the idea that a woman's murder of a man is worse than a man's woman of a murder, then that doesn't sit very well. It occurs to me, I don't think this is the case, but I'll just throw it out, that Aeschylus could actually have written this play in a subversive frame of mind on the one hand, yes, he's celebrating the virtues of the Athenian state at the end, the birth of whatever, but at the same time, what has been lost in the process? What has been lost is some concept of equality or even superiority for women, and all of those things that were earlier celebrated, fertility and so forth. The things Robert Graves talks a lot about this, that the worship of the woman gets lost along the line, and in the name of democracy.
Yeah, but I think that the Furies drew an interesting distinction between matricide and killing of one's spouse, which they seem to think was a lesser offense than matricide or patricide. So, I thought that was kind of interesting to
It's
me.
not your blood, yeah.
Yeah.
And somehow, if you call it a sacrifice, I guess it's okay to do it to your daughter.
One question I wanted to ask too of everyone. I found the first play to be so much more entertaining and dramatic than the second and the third. Am I alone in that?
We didn't read the others aloud, I guess. Lost. No, I think you're right. That's where all the action is, and most.
I wonder how the Athenian audience responded to that, especially as they're watching it all day long.
You brought up a very good point. Sometimes I listened to your comments about the closing of the play. Was it too optimistic? In some ways, Aeschylus, I think, was a very practical person. And you want to end your plays with happiness and harmony for the Greek audience. And he won more prizes that way, because Shakespeare knew that. Shakespeare knew that, so And so you want them to come back and watch again with Shakespeare. And so I think you're right, Bill. I think a lot of it's to please the audience, though, at the end, the harmonious ending. Everybody's got to be happy, and people are pleased. So I think in some ways maybe that's the Waterman in me. I don't know, but I guess you have to be practical.
I
think
wonder if someone who's watched the three plays could comment on that last thing. Are they in fact less compelling?
You mean if somebody watched what Lance sent us? The reenactments. Yeah.
Yeah,
I haven't had time, so I haven't. I intend to, though.
Kathy?
I watched them, and there was certainly more action in the first one. But I found the third one very compelling because I was trying to figure out, holy mackerel, how's this thing going to be resolved? I just, I couldn't figure it out because,
Who
yeah,
died?
yeah. So I thought it was compelling from what was taking place, not necessarily the action, but just watching how the whole thing was going to be resolved. So yeah, I really liked the third one in particular.
That's, it was Moss Hart who wrote his autobiography was Act One, and he had always said that anybody can write a good first act.
Mm.
And I've been to a lot of plays where I thought that's pretty true. The first act was really good, but it went downhill from there.
Yeah,
And I had that feeling with this too. I thought the first act was really good, and I wasn't as thrilled with the second and third acts, either watching it or reading it.
Anybody else who watched all three? About their experience? Well, there were a few of us who did it, maybe.
I haven't done it yet. I've got
I
to do
will.
it.
I will.
Okay. Well, what about that issue of the women? And what's her name? Emily Wilson's comment about the women's voice has been put to one side. Women are no longer to be listened to, according to the finish of this play, because it honored the Athenian democracy, which excluded roles for women, except as childbearers.
And apparently even that was an even more limited role than we thought, right?
Yeah.
Just as receptacles and incubators.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what they were. And I read somewhere, it was not, that part of this had to do with that idea that the women were the incubators, that they had control in the sense that they could kill the fetus from within their bodies, and that the Greek men feared women, and that this animosity towards women was based on their basically fear their ability to determine whether or not a heir was born, because they could do something with that little person inside of them. And I don't remember where I read that, but it kind of fits with the view of the science at the time. But I could not think in reading Greek philosophy where women were condemned in such a way, of being where the populace was basically men were feared women.
I think a lot of male chauvinism is based upon fear of women. I think, and fear of women's control. I think, I'm sure that goes way back. I think.
Watermen have an expression: "Mama's baby, daddy's maybe."
There was a tradition. I don't know if it was still in operation in the 5th century, but it was earlier. I mean, there's a pretty good evidence by the scholars, I believe, that when babies, after babies were born, it was acceptable to take them up on a mountain to die if you didn't want them to live, either for inheritance reasons or something. If you wanted more males to be soldiers, then more female babies would be taken up, but male babies could also be taken up for other reasons. And that as long as that was done within the first 2 years of a baby's life, that was not considered a crime. After 2 years, it was. Yeah. So they certainly were on the side of abortion, you would think, given that there was no sense that there was something special to be honored by a fetus.
I know that
Forrest,
there was
it sounds like you've been listening too much to Herschel Walker.
Well, Oedipus, of course, meant sore ankles. His ankles were tethered, and he was left to die on Mount Cithra.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and that was legitimate. That was okay.
Yeah. Could we go back to that point, mama's baby,
Yeah,
daddy, maybe? I think that's the key. That's key here, because and by the way, this is all my wife. I'm the messenger again. She said, she told me that she remembers from reading these things years ago that that this was indeed a kind of turning point in cultural history. That the matrilineal society was based upon the legitimacy of the passing on of authority to from a mother to a child, because you always knew that that was her child. You never knew who the father was, but you always knew who the mother was. And here, what we have is a kind of a rejection of that idea, and you have Athena saying, "Hey, I was born without a mother. Therefore, there's nothing. There's nothing. It's not even that that she says, to kill your mother is worse than killing your husband. She seems to acquit him of any guilt whatsoever. I mean, it's not even a matter of relativity. It's yeah, you can kill your mother because she's not, it's not all that important. She's not really your blood. You're not really her product. Nothing, just like I'm not. Anyway, enough said.
But you still have the question when Helen returns to Menelaus after having, the affair with Paris and everything. Menelaus does not question her absence. Simply pleasing Aphrodite. That's all the reason they needed. You pleased the gods. You pleased Aphrodite. It was Aphrodite's doing. It has another aspect to this whole discussion.
Sure. The cuckolded husband finds a way to save the face, I guess.
Something, you brought up something interesting. Homer was blind, as you know. And part of the ancient Greek tradition is that Greeks struck the male blind who were cuckold. So so people have wondered throughout the ages whether Homer, if he really exists, and I'm pretty sure he did, whether he was similarly characterized as a cuckold, because as he struck blind.
Yeah. Okay.
Most of you know that up into the 19th century, in Western culture, in Great Britain at least, the father's estate passed to the oldest son. And women didn't have any. Women weren't in line for any of that collection, and that was true. A very powerful voice. Well, we know that women didn't get the vote until the 20th century.
Right, and in the 20th century, a woman couldn't get a credit card without her husband's signature.
Yes.
But I think when we read on Liberty, I'm drawing a blank on the author.
John Stuart Mill.
Yeah, John Stuart Mill's wife, was fighting for women's rights at the time, and women's rights back then basically meant to own anything. So that misogyny has a several thousand-year history.
Well,
no kidding.
Until a decade ago, you mentioned Britain. Even if the oldest child is a female, she couldn't inherit the throne if there's a son as well.
Yeah.
That's changed finally now.
So does Emily Watson's interpretation of Aeschylus posing this issue of how, in the end, the woman's role is demoted by Aeschylus in the play. Does that cause you to kind of rethink what this whole play is about?
But she makes the point that prior to Aeschylus, that women seem to have a voice and I'm saying, is she giving him too much credit? I mean, did he have that much power over society that prior to him?
No, I think only she means that in his play, before this is decided at the end, but in the first play especially, and the second, that the power went to the person who committed these terrible murders, going all the way back to the brother of one chopping up his brother's children and serving them as stew. It's not just how Clytemnestra could do such awful things, but so did the brother of Thyestes do this awful thing, feeding the children of his brother in a stew. So, but she is saying, we really should go back and reread Aeschylus, keeping in mind that in that play, in that trilogy, the women had a real role that they could play, but at the very end, after the very end, they no longer are given that very strong role. All that she meant, I think, Mike, was in the plays, not historically.
It's an interesting point, but I think it's also, if you're gonna attribute that kind of power to the message that because a jury decides this, and we know historically that juries were all male, if you're going to attribute that kind of power to that particular fact, then you also have to attribute the same kind of power to the fact that it's a woman who makes the final decision, and it's Athena who breaks the tie.
But a very, very odd female in that she was born from the head of Zeus.
Forehead of Zeus, yeah. Talk about a headache.
Oh my.
Well, yeah, Athena represents what? Wisdom, right? The owl.
Yeah.
And, all of those things that Athenian society held dear, and yet she, I think, I mean, putting it baldly, she kind of sells out her sex in this play, and does so, it seems to me, as in defense of, or in support of essentially male values. So yeah, I think Emily Wilson's hit something here very squarely on the head.
You might like to sometime read her translation of the Odyssey. She was the first woman to do that. And she also talks in this review about how even today there are more women classicists than men, but the men still had the various scholarly organizations and chairs of departments and so on, so that even though there are more women than men, as there are more MDs in this country and more lawyers also who are women, that increasing number does not mean a change in authority necessarily.
She also has a great book called The Death of Socrates, which is an interpretation of that story through the ages.
Yeah, which Richard has told me, and I still haven't read at the time.
Another question I had, one thing that intrigued me in the first play And there's mention of nets again throughout the plays, and that may just be the maritime culture. But it's always struck me as sort of strange that Hecuba, and I mean not Hecuba, Clytemnestra, that they make this such a big deal about the fact that not only does she kill him, but she traps him in a net in his tub. What is that all about?
After the water ban.
Well, I think in one of the plays it's mentioned that the Greeks threw a net over Troy. Don't they
Yeah,
say so?
There is
Yeah,
something about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so a net is thrown over an entire city, not just Agamemnon.
So, and of course, there are fishermen who fish with nets, and who still do to this day.
Yeah.
You know, have sometimes enormous nets. So it's a way to incapacitate what
So in Rome,
we want to get, and the nets that fishermen use now and more. There's some controversy because they harvest fish, all kinds of fish besides the rockfish or whatever they're fishing for, and so sometimes these fish die or are wounded, and some of them are precious species and
I
need to
catch.
be fished out. So the net can be a somewhat efficient vehicle, but it certainly was very efficient in Clytemnestra's use. She really disabled
in Rome, they gave
Agamemnon.
gladiators, didn't they? Wasn't
Yes.
that one?
Yes.
They were equipped with a sword and a net as
Yeah.
weapon.
Even today, you have to attend your drift nets. In other words, it used to be when I was much younger, first began the war, you could leave them out, but now you have to stay within sight of them because they're so efficient. And pound netting has pretty well stayed the same. But now you're going to have release rings and everything, even on crab pots and so on. I get things in the mail all the time about areas I don't even work in the ocean, about making sure there are escape mechanisms on various harvesting methods for endangered species, like turtles and so on.
Did the and the bath that she kills Cassandra and Agamemnon in? Does anyone know? Like, I'm trying. I'm picturing a bathtub, but I'm sure I'm wrong. Was this a big pool, and was the net suspended above it or below it? How did people bathe?
Oh, like a shower. It was like a shower, wasn't it?
I could.
It was kind of like they stood up, at least in Roman days, that we have evidence in the ruins. So I guess that's how she cast the net.
Bill, I can run the movies for you if you like.
Yeah.
I was thinking it was a metaphor for the internet, but I guess it isn't.
Good question, Bill. I don't have an answer to that.
Yeah, right.
Having seen a lot of the ancient sites, what's left of them, I can't remember ones that had bathtubs. There are ones if you ever visit Ephesus, you can go to the remains of what's really a Roman bath there, but it includes urinals that people sat on, and they would sit on them and do their thing, but also chat. They were very places for social gathering.
Well, in
I
Jerusalem,
can't remember the bathtubs.
in Jerusalem, there were ritual bathtubs, I believe. In some of the ruins of ancient Jewish cities in Jerusalem and around Jerusalem, they have found bathtubs for ritual baths that women were required to take in Judaism.
Yeah, in that tradition of the very conservative Judaism, the women are required to take what's called the mikvah.
Mikvah.
The mikvah, which is a bath, and it's not only required for just before a wedding, but at other religious occasions as well. I don't know all of that, but Richard.
I hate to change the subject because this is so good, but what happens to Orestes? Does he disappear from history or from literature.
Ah,
He's the leader of Argos. He's pledged to defend Athens. Does he ever have to make good on his deal? What kind of a leader would he turn out to be? Blah blah blah.
yeah.
I
Okay.
don't.
Another question that Richard will leave us with.
I'll
If you
do
don't- if
I'll
you
do some
don't mind.
research. I'll do some research and see you in the winter.
You know something interesting? Schliemann, the same guy who was unschooled and insisted that there was really a Troy and found it. Anyhow, he also, after that project, looked for the burial site of Agamemnon. He was convinced that Agamemnon was a real person and so on and so forth because Troy was real. And supposedly he found the death mask of Agamemnon. Now, there's some dispute about it because there were 5 masks. And he decided that the one that was Agamemnon was the death mask with a beard, and indicating, evidently in those days, that high and mighty people often grew these beards like Richard has, and a little like a goatee type thing. And so that, I don't know if anybody knows anything further about that or not. Then they kind of assumed that was the grave site of Agamemnon. I don't know if there's any veracity to that or not. I just read that one time, a long time ago.
Okay, but there's still
Forrest probably knows. I don't.
Orestes' future that we might check on. I'd like to ask my brother Lee, who said he's been silent there, but I've seen him laughing and having various facial expressions. Lee, do you want to say anything about Aeschylus or about our study?
I commend you for organizing this, Forest, and for attracting this illustrious group of participants, and for their insights. They've read very closely, they've thought about it, and your questions have prodded them to think in what you might call constructive ways. And what comes through to me is that the search for meaning is very challenging, and it's something that we don't do enough in our college and maybe high school teaching. We tend to pontificate, lecture to our students, and we don't get them really involved in whatever the content is that we're talking about. So this is what I'd love to see. And my wife and I organized in Madison and led for 40 years a Great Books discussion group. And we went through everything the Great Books Foundation had and all of the newer volumes. And it was the high point of the month, getting together with about a dozen other folks, talking about ideas, which is a rare encounter in life. So I commend all of you for joining Forrest in this endeavor. And he promises more, apparently, in the coming months. Anyway, a great experience for me. And I've withheld my comments because I wanted to let all of you shine, which you have done.
Which you have done, absolutely. I'm so grateful for all of you for your participation, for your interest, your reflections, and your willingness to put forth your ideas. And this has just been a wonderful, wonderful experience.
And thank you, Forrest. You've been fabulous organizing the whole.
Yes, thank you.
Actually,
Yeah.
it's you who do all the work, and you're the ones who really make this go. So I appreciate that.
Well, and Aeschylus gets a little credit too.
Right. What a rich work for us to work with.
Yeah, no kidding.
A lot of plays that you wouldn't want to expend your mental energy on, but this one bears up for that. Okay,
What is your next
Yeah.
next spring? You
Well,
mentioned
next spring I'm going to do a course on the Republic. Now that's a big work So that's going to take a bit of time. I've gotten permission to do it in 4 sessions instead of just 3. And I'll have to be selective in what we focus on. And I probably will also push my own interpretation more than I usually do, because I think that the Republic has been misread by a lot of people, including some noted scholars. And I have an opinion that differs from theirs. So I'll probably push a bit more for my own interpretation. But it's going to be a lovely work to do. It's, as I said, quite long, and we'll have to figure out, I'll have to figure out certain portions that we can skip over. We're not going to read it all together. That would take a month or 2. We'd be like Rabbi Peter going on Exodus for 2 or 3 years. So that's what I'm offering.
Great.
So I hope some of you might join me then.
If you have a favorite edition that you think you might use, could you let us know and we can start reading now?
I will. I'm going. It won't be necessary because every edition has the line numbers, so it's not quite so important. But I've just ordered the most recent copy, the most recent translation of the Republic. So I'll have a look at that, and I've got 4 or 5 other ones that I have on my bookshelves here. So I will pick out one to recommend, but it won't be vital to do that. But it'll be helpful. Okay, hope to see you again.
Well, thank you for
so
making
much.
this
Very much.
available.
Nice meeting everybody.
Yes, nice meeting
Thank you,
all.
everybody.
Thank you for
Appreciate it.
making this available.